Okay, so we're going to talk about list columns today, but we're going to review Lab 2 first. So I did check Canvas. It looks like most people have that turned in. If not, maybe just take a little break while we review Lab 2, and then you can come back later while we do the rest, okay? Then I'm going to introduce list columns, and there's sort of two different ways to work with list columns, and we're going to compare and contrast those. The second one is a newer way of working with list columns. It's a little bit confusing sometimes, but I think overall it's actually pretty nice because it allows you to do basically all the same stuff without actually having to do any looping. So I'll show you both ways to do that, and then during the midterm, you saw I asked you to actually use both of these methods. And then the last, we'll actually stop class in about an hour because I want to give you the last 20 minutes for the in-class midterm. So if you go to Canvas now, you should be able to see it there. It's been there for a while, or you can click here and that should take you to the quiz on Canvas as well. Okay, and so we'll do that for the last 20 minutes. So I'll stop at about 11:15. I don't think it's going to take you 20 minutes, but you'll have 20 minutes to complete it anyway. Okay. So the learning objectives today are to understand list columns and how they relate to base split. So we've been using split multiple times now. List columns are very, very similar. They're just sort of organized in a little bit different format. So hopefully by the end of today, you can pretty fluently nest and unnest data frames, and then understand why that is a pretty powerful framework. Okay, so I'm going to first, though, review Lab 2. So here we are, Lab 2. And the first part, I asked you to load some data. So we do that, and we get the data that looks like this. Okay, and then recode season into wave. Okay, so now benchmarks looks like this. We've got this wave 0, 1, 2. For many of these students, they actually only have one time point. And so that's going to make fitting this model impossible, basically, okay, because we're going to use wave 0, 1, 2 to predict their score. And if they only have one observation, then it's not going to be able to estimate that slope, okay? But what I asked you to do is fit a model of this form, math predicted by wave, for each student. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to split benchmarks by SID, right? And so we get like a zillion data frames like this, okay? Then I'm going to pipe that straight to map again and say lm math wave, where the data is .x. .x being a placeholder for each data frame, okay? So I do that, and we get something that looks like this. So this is a big list. You can see for some students, we have a slope. For many students, though, we just have NAs, and that's not a problem. It's just because they don't have data, okay? Then we're going to extract the coefficients from those models. So we're going to loop through that again and apply the function coef. And you can see it looks like this, okay? And then finally, I asked you to pull out the slope. So that's just that second one. And because in this case, now each iteration is going to return a number, I can use map double instead of map, and then it will return an atomic vector of type double, okay? And the names of this vector are the SIDs, okay? So this is the student ID, and then the values are the estimated slope, okay? I also have in here just a couple of alternative ways of doing it. So this is the exact same thing, just doing it sort of more in steps rather than piping it. So first we're splitting the data frame, then we're fitting the models, then we're extracting the coefficients, and then we're extracting the slopes. Notice here, I extracted the slope a slightly different way. There's many ways you could do this. This line, you could also do it like this, right? Map coefs wave, so you don't have to say .x wave, or map coefs 2, get the second one, which is what I did up here, right? Okay, then I asked you to plot the distribution of these slopes. So I'm going to take these things, this slopes thing that I created, and I'm going to put it in a data frame. So I'm going to first take the names of my split DF, which is, oops, I didn't create, it's here. I could also say the names of slopes, because that's going to be the same thing. And that's going to give me all of the SIDs, okay? And then for slope, I'm just going to give it the values of slopes. And so we end up with a data frame that looks like this. Okay, and it does have a lot of missingness, but that's okay. Then we're just going to plot it. This should be pretty straightforward. To plot is the data frame we're going to plot. We have slopes as the thing we want the distribution of. Geom histogram. I have a fill and color, so it looks like that. And then I'm just saying geom v-line to annotate it where the x-intercept is equal to the mean of slopes. Okay, and I have to remove missing data on that mean calculation. I'm going to do that, and there we go. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, on to Star Wars. So this time we have to use this recursive package, and this is mostly just to get at some really deeply nested lists, and we were trying to work through those lists to pull out specific things. Okay, so the first thing I asked you to do is use the SW films list to identify how many characters were represented in each film. So the way that I would generally suggest doing this, right, is sort of in the essence of functional programming. First, I would look at the structure of SW films, and you could use view on this instead if you wanted. So you could do view SW films, and you get something that looks like this. Notice there's 7 elements of this. So that, in this case, each element contains information on a corresponding film. So SW films title, A New Hope, right? So this is all of the information for the film A New Hope, whereas this one is Attack of the Clones, etc. Okay, so that's cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pull out the first film. I'm going to call it film 1. Okay, so here's a list now for film 1. And if I want to get the title, I would just go film 1 $title, and there we go. I get it. All right. So that's how I get it for one list, one element of the list. So if I want to get it for all of them, then I just need to extend that to a loop. And I could say map, but in this case, it's going to return a character each time. So I can do map CHR, and then I get just the titles. Okay. Notice this is also equivalent to this, what I have down here. So I don't really, if all I'm doing is saying, give me this thing that is named in the list, then I don't have to have this tilde.x $. I could, I mean, it's not hurting anything, but you don't have to either. You could just say, give me this named thing from the list. Okay, so that's how we're going to get the film. But then we also want to know how many characters were represented in each film. So here I'm going to just loop through my SW films and grab the characters. Okay, and notice these are a bunch of URLs, right? So these are API calls for various people. And so I could, if this API were still active, actually run some of that code, and it would take me to the information for that character. But instead, I'm just going to trust that that is going to lead me to information for that character. So I just need to know how many elements are in each of those, and that will tell me how many characters are in that film. So if I say map double on length, then I get this 18, 40, 34. So that's the number of characters. Okay. Now in this case, I chose to return a vector because I didn't tell you in number 1 what the return type should be, right? So I just went ahead and said, okay, now set the names of this vector to be titles. Okay, so then when I do that, in car now looks like this. We have the name of the film and the number of characters. Okay. Alternatively, you could just as easily put them in a data frame. So the film is equal to titles, and then the number of characters is numcar, and we get something like that. Okay.
Hey, Daniel.
Yep.
So I did the data frame, but I'm wondering if you could just say a little more about set names. That was like magic. How did you, what happened there?
Yeah, so set names works like this. So I can say set names, and then I have some vector. So let's say it's just like 3, 4, 5. So the vector that's being passed in here via the pipe is this part, right? Just these numbers. And then you just give it the names that you want it to have. So another vector of the same length, A, B, C, right? And it's going to set the names of that vector to be this vector. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Sorry, I think I was just confused because you only passed it one argument, but it's because you piped in. I was like, wow, how did that happen? But I get it. Thank you.
Yep. Yep. That's why I think piping is super useful and regularly helps make code more clear. But occasionally like this, it's like, wait, where did that come from? How did that do that, right? And it's because you just always have to think of the pipe as whatever the output is from the previous thing is being inserted as the first argument for the next thing. All right. Any other questions on that part? Okay, so now the next part, number 2, said use the SW species list to A, identify species that have a known hair color, and B, identify what those hair colors are. So again, there's lots of different ways you can do this, just like everything, right? But this is the way I chose to do it. So again, I'm taking this sort of solve the problem on one and then generalize it to the rest. Okay, so I'm going to go view here instead of str. But so here's species, right? So each element of this list is a species. So I can click on this and there's all this stuff, right? And one of them is hair colors. Okay, and you can see for this species, which is hut, it's NA. Okay, so all right, that species doesn't have hair colors. What about this one? Hair colors brown, white. This is Yoda species. Okay, so this is what I want to get out of it, is the hair color, and I want to get the name. So I can tie the hair color to a specific species. Okay, so I'm going to just grab the first species. Okay, first species is a big list like this. And then I'm going to say, okay, give me the hair colors, NA. And so then to get all of them, I would just say, all right, map through SW species and give me the hair color. And I get them like this. Okay, notice I'm using map CHR here to return a vector instead of a list, an atomic vector. Okay, now I know a lot of people tried to have this, have the sort of search only return the elements that had something, but actually in this case it's far easier to just return everything, and this is actually fairly regularly the case. Have it return everything and then filter it after the fact. So like I could even call this thing temp, right? And then I could say temp, where temp is not equal to none, right? And then it would subset it like that. Okay, so that's going to be the easiest way to do this. But if you really wanted to, you could do something like, let's grab this. Could do something like this where we would say .x hair colors, where .x hair colors is not equal to none. That doesn't work actually, because it's going to give us it's going to give us a vector that's not the same length as the thing we're looping through. So instead, actually, we still have to have it return something. So what we would probably do is say, do something like this, right? You could actually, I would probably write my own function outside of this to do this if this is what I really wanted. But I'd say if else .x hair colors equal to none, then NA character otherwise .x hair colors. Okay. Oops. Okay. And then it still returns a vector of the same length, but now we just have NAs for those ones where it's none. Okay. And then of course I could drop NAs or whatever after that. But in this case too, we're also wanting to loop through the species to grab the name. So that's even more reason why it makes sense to do this filtering after the fact. So go grab all the stuff, bring it back in a simpler form than the list, and then subset that in whatever way makes the most sense. So I thought it made the most sense to just go ahead and put these in a data frame and then filter the data frame. So I have I'm creating a tibble, right, where species is, I'm just going to map through species, SW species, and grab the name. Okay, so that's going to give me all the names. And then I just do the same thing again, grabbing the hair colors. And then when I put them together, I get this entire data frame. Okay. From there, now I just have a normal data frame. It's like anything else that we've ever been working with, right? So I'm going to pipe to filter and say where hair is not equal to none, and hair is not equal to NA, and hair is not equal to unknown. Okay. And when I do that, now I just get these 7 rows of the data frame. Questions on that? Okay. Moving on to part C, some basic API calls. So what we're doing now, we're moving from Star Wars to Pokemon because we are very serious in this class. So here, I had you use this HTTR package, right? And if you want to get data on the first ability for a Pokemon, you do it like this, right? Get, then you pass the URL, then you pipe that to content parsed. So this, if I just run this part, it's going to give me this response thing in return. But when I say content parsed, that's going to parse all of that information into a list. So now this looks very much like what we were just dealing with Star Wars. Okay, so if we have this for ability 1, if we want to grab the name, we'd say ability 1 $name, get stench. If we want to know how many Pokemon have this ability, we could say ability 1 Pokemon, and it would say 8. All right. So what I asked you to do is use per to write an API call to obtain the first 5 abilities. All right. And I know a lot of people started by just running basically this API call. And that returns the ability for all Pokemon. But that's not what I was asking you to do. What I was asking you to do is run a loop through this to get each of the first 5. Okay, so this is how I chose to do it. And again, there's multiple ways you could do it. But I just said paste 0, the first part of this API call, and then 1 to 5. Okay, and so when I do that, abilities looks like this. Okay, so this is the API call for the first ability, the second ability, the third ability, the fourth ability, and the 5th ability. Okay, now I have all of those links, and I can just say, okay, let's loop through those links and apply the function get. Okay, so this is equivalent to map abilities tilde get.x, right? So there's all of the abilities, but now I need to loop through them again to parse the content. So here I'm saying loop through this Poke's ability thing, apply the function content, and then pass the argument parsed to content. Okay, so again, as I've mentioned before, you can just pass a function here, and then if there's additional arguments you want to pass to the function, they can follow here. All right, so this is equivalent to this call here, which is maybe a little bit more clear in this case, but I wanted to show you multiple ways to do it. Okay, so I run that, and now I've got all of my abilities for the first 5 Pokemon, or first 5 abilities. So now, the next part, I said use the parse data to create a data frame that has the given ability and the number of Pokemon with that ability. So if I look at like the third one, right? The third ability name is speed boost, right? The first ability name is stench, as we saw before. Okay, so if I just apply map CHR to pokes and I say give me the name, I get the name for all of them returned as an atomic vector. Okay, and as I showed up here, ability 1 Pokemon, the length of ability 1 Pokemon is going to give me the number of Pokemon with that ability. So what we're doing here is we're saying loop through pokes and then apply the function length of .x Pokemon. Okay, and I'm using map int here because each iteration is going to return a single integer. And it looks like that. Okay, then we're going to just put them in a data frame, and it's pretty straightforward from here. We put our ability call there and our Pokemon call here. Okay, and then we get Pokemon abilities. It looks like that. Any questions on that? Okay, so that was it. But then for the bonus for up to 1 point extra credit, I said, give me the names of these 8 Pokemon and the names of these 3 Pokemon and the names of these 12 Pokemon, basically. Okay, and this is quite difficult, which is why it was a bonus question. Okay, so if I have ability, right, I'm saying what's the name, here's those, the same names. And then I can do this where I'm saying, okay, rather than just giving me the length of those things, of the Pokemon, P is going to be a list of all of the Pokemon, right? And this is still a nested list, okay? So if I say P1, I get, let me clear this out. P1, I get all of this, okay? So here's the Pokemon, and its Pokemon name is Gloom, okay? So if I say P1 here, that's this list. And then within there, I've got 1 here, okay? So now I can run both of those, and I get this, and then I've got $ Pokemon name, and I've got Gloom, okay? So that's pretty complicated on its own. But then this part is even more complicated because now what we've got to do is we've got to essentially loop through this thing as we're looping through the entire thing. Okay, so we're going to loop through pokes, and then on each iteration of pokes, we're going to apply this map character where we're going to loop through .x Pokemon, so this thing, and we're going to get .x Pokemon name. Okay, so oh, sorry, I said .x Pokemon down there when .x Pokemon would be actually this thing. Okay, like P here. It's the same as P. Okay, so we do that, and we get the names like this. This is still a list, and it has to be a list because they're different links, right? We can't say map character because we would lose sort of the structure here of where they came from. So we use map instead of map character, and actually if we did map character, we would get an error. Okay, so map, we now get the five abilities, and then we have the names of the Pokemon within each of those 5. Okay, now this is still not particularly like straightforward, but what I did is I actually created a list column, which we're going to talk about today. Okay, and so it looks like this. I just said, give me a tibble that has the Pokemon and the ability. So now we have the ability, but then we have a list column here where each element of this is all the names of the Pokemon. Okay, and then from there I can just say unnest, and it looks like this. So here's the Pokemon with this ability. Okay, so that part, I mean, you know, obviously there was a reason it was extra credit. That was quite difficult. And there are multiple ways that you could approach it. That was the way I chose to approach it, but you could have chosen a different way. Any questions on that?
No question, but I wonder if you could share this code so I can try on my own.
Yes, I was just about to mention that. I will, so sort of just generally overall, I am busier this term than normal by a considerable margin. And so my plan for grading for labs and things, I'll still do my normal thing with the midterm and the final, but with labs is basically we go over them in class like this, and then I'm going to post them to the repo, and so you'll have access to them. I'll do it today, so you'll have access to the first 2 labs, and then I'm just going to give you credit for it. And if you have additional follow-up questions, you can either review this video or you can get in contact with me and we can go over them that way. Okay? So I will post this later today. Any other questions or comments? On we go. Okay, so let's do the setup. Please follow along. Go ahead and launch R, and then library tidyverse, library fs for our file systems, and then we're going to do this dirls. We're going to read all of these data in. Okay, so go ahead and do that. You can just copy this code too by clicking here. All right, hopefully you've got that done. Now go ahead and just copy this, and that'll parse the file data. So now we're going to compare models. So now that I can see you, can you give me a thumbs up emoji if you are caught up? Okay, good, good. All right, so let's say we want to compare a set of models. Okay, so this is like real data-ish. I mean, it's simulated, it's made up data, but it's similar to real data, right? It's generated from that. So let's say we wanted to fit a real model where we have theta, which is like the student's estimated ability or score, and that is predicted by their primary disability code. Okay, and then we have a second model where we're including their primary disability code plus their secondary disability code. And finally, we have a third model that is their primary disability code times their secondary disability code. So this is the interaction. So we're modeling main effects for primary and secondary plus the interaction between those 2 things. Okay, so this is a very reasonable thing that we might want to do. Okay, but let's say now we want to do this for each content area, right? So we're going to fit these separately for each content area. All right. So the disability variables are stored as numbers. We need them as factors, so we can change that. So you can copy this code. I have a link here to what those primary disability codes mean. Again, like I said, though, this is simulated data, but it is based on real data. Okay, but this is just for modeling. So go ahead and do that part. And then you don't have to follow along on this part, but this is the base method that we've been using, right? So had we wanted to do this using the methods that we have learned about so far, this is how we would do this, right? We would say split content, where we're splitting D by D content, and we get a list that's returned like this. It's of length 5, where each element of the list is all of the data for that content area, right? Then we would probably go through and do something like this. So I'm creating a new object, which I'm calling M1, where I'm saying map through split content and apply this model where the data is .x. Then M2, do the same thing, but add a plus and add secondary disability. And then for M3, I would multiply, right? So now I have 3 different model objects. Each of those is going to be a list of models, one for each content area. Okay? And then we could go through to conduct tests to see which model we think fits the data better for each content area, etc. The problem with this approach is that now we've got a list object for our data, and we've got 3 list objects of models. And so when we're starting to try to compare across these things, it can just get a little confusing in terms of managing all of this stuff that's sort of just out there. An alternative that we can do is to use list columns. Okay, so what we do here now is we say, take our data frame D, we're going to say group by content, and then nest. Okay, so we're going to group by just like we would group by if we were going to summarize, but then we're just going to pass that straight to nest. Okay, and then when I look at by content, it looks like this, right? I have the content area here, and then I have this data column that comes up. Okay, and what this is it's a list column where each element of the list is the data frame for that corresponding content area. So this is all of the data for ELA right there in that cell of the data frame, right? This is all of the data for math, all of the data for reading, etc. Okay, does that make sense? So this is just like doing split, where we split by content area. The only difference is this is maintaining the data frame structure. Other than that, it's the same thing. So if we look at this, you can say str by content data. You can see you get a list of length 5, and it's going to look exactly identical to the split method. Okay? So we can explore this a bit. We can say map double on by content data row and compute the number of rows. We get those. Map double on data, compute the number of columns. It's 26 for all of them. And then by content data, what's the mean of .x theta? Okay, and then we get different values there. Okay, and because it's a data frame, what's nice is we can use mutate, and we can just go ahead and actually add this stuff to our data frame. Okay, so you can actually see here in the message, it tells you how many rows and how many columns there are, but maybe we wanted to add that as a new column to our data frame. We could say by content mutate. We're going to create a new variable called n, where we're going to map double. We're going to loop through data, this column, and apply the function nRow. Okay, and that's going to do the same thing as over here, exact same thing, but it's just going to store it in a new column here. And it's looping through this data column, and because we're saying by content past that here, then we just say data instead of by content data. Does that make sense? So on the previous slide, I used map double, right? And I got a vector in return, and so everything looked normal. But what if we just use map? In this case, right, the thing I'm getting returned every time is an integer of length 1. But because I'm using map, it's still always going to return a list, right? Map is going to always, always, always return a list. So we get a list column in return if we're using map, which is not as useful in this case, right? But it is useful if we're going to fit a model. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. What we're doing, as you're doing it, I can kind of talk through it, right? I'm creating a new column in my data set called M1 for model 1, right? For that column, I'm going to loop through data, the data list column, and I'm going to apply this function, this lm function, where I'm going to use data equals .x to fill in each data frame. Okay? And so what I get in return is a list column where each element is the list, is a model, right? It's an LM object, which is a list. Does that make sense? What's nice about this too is we can continue with this, right? So I can say, now create a coefs column where I'm saying loop through M1 and extract the coefficients. Okay. And this is kind of not super useful here because it's still a list column, so I can't really see anything, right? But we can dig into that more, and we will in just a second. But for the next 4 minutes, I'd like you to continue on with what we just did and see if you can output a data frame with 3 columns, okay? Just 3 columns at the end. It should have the content, the intercept, the estimated intercept, okay, and TBI, which is code 4074. All right. So you're going to output the mean score for students who are coded as not having a disability, which is the reference group, along with students coded as having TBI. Okay. Go ahead and give that a shot. Okay. Give me some sort of an emoji letting me know how successful you felt like you were. Okay. Thank you. I'm getting a lot of the same emoji. All right. This is how I would have done it, okay? I have by content. I'm going to mutate. I'm going to create a new column called M1, where I'm going to map through data and apply the model that I want, okay? Then on the next line, I'm creating a new column called coefs, where I'm going to map through M1, which I created here, and called coefs. Then I'm going to create a new column, which I'm calling no disability, where I'm going to say map double. Notice I'm using map double here instead of map. Map through coefs, this thing, and give me the first one, right? The first one's going to be the intercept. And then TBI, I'm going to map through coefs and pull out primary 74, right? I said the code was 74. In this case, I said no disab plus that because that'll give me the actual mean for TBI students, but I didn't actually expect you to do that part. All right. So then finally, I'm just going to say select content, no disab, and TBI, and I end up with this. So here's my different groups, right? And then the mean score for students with no disability and the mean score for students with a traumatic brain injury. Questions on that? So hopefully you can already see that this is like a pretty powerful approach, right? All right, let's go back to our original task of fitting the 3 models. So I'm probably not going to give you 4 minutes here. That was probably a bit high, but I'll do like 3 minutes. Try to fit all 3 of these models to the data, okay? And store them as new columns in your data set. Okay, so we are not going to get through all the slides today, which is totally fine. But we only have like 10 more minutes until I'm going to have you break and go to the quiz, okay? So this is how I would do this, right? By content, map M1, M2, M3. 3 new columns I'm going to create. All of them are basically structured the same. I'm just going to say map through data on all of them. And then I'm just going to specify the model that I want with each time saying data equals .x. And then my data frame looks like this now, where I have content, data, and then M1, M2, M3. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna like next week we're gonna talk about parallel iteration, so looping through 2 vectors or 3 vectors at the same time. Really quickly, I'm just gonna give a very brief intro to that. If we let's just move on from that. If we wanted to, let's go back here. Sorry. So here's M1, here's M2, right? And let's say I want to compare the results from this model to the results from this model, right? Which is what we would typically do if we were actually modeling this, right? We want to see if this model fits the data any better than this model, okay? So we could do something like this, right? We could say mods M1, 1 with mods M2, 1, right? That's going to give me the first model from M1 and the first model from M2. And so we get the models down here, and they're kind of overlapping and whatever. But so we could compare them with this function ANOVA, where we would say ANOVA mods M1 and mods M2, and then we get something right here, right? And this p-value is, you know, an indication of if the second model fits better than the first. Cool. So what we can do is we can apply map2 to loop through both sets of models at the same time, and then use this ANOVA function. So we would do that like this. I'm creating a new column again, which I'm calling comp12, compare model 1 and model 2, okay? Where I'm going to say map2 loop through both M1 and M2 simultaneously, and then apply the function ANOVA. So what that's going to do is it's going to put this as the first argument and this as the second argument for each row, okay? It's going to loop through them both at the same time. So now we get this comparison. All right, still not terrifically helpful because it's in a list column. If we look at our ANOVA object, we can see that it has this stuff, and probably what we want is actually this p-value. I mean, there's probably other stuff we want too, but for the sake of argument, let's say we just care about the p-value because we like to look at shiny things. All right, so let's pull out the p-value. If we were going to do this just for the one ANOVA object that we have, I would say compare, which was the name of my object, right? $, and then I could put this weird code around prf, and I would get this. Or I could do it this way with the double brackets, and I get the same thing. Notice this is still a vector of length 2, okay? And I really only want that second one. So what I'd actually do is just pull the second one from here. So this is now, again, like going back to the first lecture, when you are building up functions like this, you're very regularly going to have to dig into these things and do some weird stuff to try to pull out exactly what it is you want, right? And this is an example of that where I'm using compare. I'm going into compare. I'm having to use double brackets to get to the p-value, and then I'm going to say, give me just the second element from that p-value vector. Okay. If I wanted now, and you can't see this, unfortunately, but I could pull out the p-value for all of them like this. Okay, so I create the comparison, and then I'm going to create a thing called p12, the p-value comparing model 1 and model 2, where I'm going to map double for comp12, and I'm going to say this. Okay, list, give me the p-value, and give me just the second element of the p-value. Okay. Alternatively, we could actually put this extract p as its own function. And this is probably more how I would do this, because it's going to make it more clear in terms of the code, right? So I'm creating this function that takes an ANOVA object, and then we're just swapping ANOVA ob for what we had before with compare. Everything else is exactly the same. That's going to return just the p-value from an ANOVA object. Okay, now we can loop through this, and we would just do it like this, right? Comp12, blah, blah, blah. But then when we get to the p12, we're going to map double through comp12 and extract the p-value. That's it. Okay, and if you could see the rest of this data frame, you would see the actual p-values, not a list, because we're using map double. All right. This is the row-wise stuff. Let's see how much. All right, I'll just talk about this for a second, and then we'll come back to this. We'll start here next time. Okay, so I know some of this has been a little bit fast in the last 5 minutes or so, but I'll just talk about this for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll break for the quiz, and then I'll review this again next time we talk. Okay. So dplyr has this new function, new within the last, like, I don't know, 6 months or something like that, called row-wise. All right, and it fundamentally changes the way that a tibble works. Instead of conducting all the operations by column, it conducts them by rows. And so here's a really quick example, right? I have a tibble. I say name, me, and you, and then x is 1 to 2, y is 3 to 4, and z is 5 to 6. Okay, so here's what my, that's what my data frame looks like. And if I say mutate, create a new column called m, which is going to be the mean of x, y, z, well, this is going to say the mean of x, the mean of y, the mean of z, and it's going to give me 3.5, right? If I say if I first say row-wise, and then I compute the mean of that, because remember, when I use C, right, it's going to basically collapse everything. So this is going to be the mean of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Here with this row-wise, now it's going to compute the mean by row. So this first one we get 3, the second one we get 4. Okay. Does that make sense? So row-wise is changing the way that the operations actually are conducted. You can add a group, so you could say row-wise by name, and then summarize, and then you just get the name there in this case. But row-wise also works with list columns. Okay, so here I have a list 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and then I can. So here's just what the list looks like, right? But if I say df mutate l map int x, give me the length, then I get 1, 2, 3. Right? That's the way we've been doing it. We can also do it like this: df row-wise, give me a new column called L, which is the length of X. And so that this works because it's going row-wise, it's conducting the operations by row. And so when you say what's the length of X, it'll tell you it's 1, 2, 3. Okay, and this ends up being really nice because then we can actually do things like compute. Let me see. We can compute new models in the same sort of way. So we're saying mutate, now just say list lm theta, etc. Okay, so it's just, and again, we'll get to this more. I'll review this again next time, and we're gonna have to sort of push back some of the content because we have a lot left to cover from today that we didn't get to. That's okay. But basically the point is, row-wise is going to really change the way that everything is handled, and so that it can actually help you avoid having to write these loops if you want. But I still think it's super valuable to be able to do the loops because they're more general, and that's going to be having the knowledge both ways is good. If you can only have one, I would say the knowledge of looping is better, is more powerful. Okay. The other thing is this row-wise thing is only going to work if it's in a data frame, right? So all of that stuff we were doing with like the Star Wars lists and everything and the API calls, that's not going to work with row-wise. Okay, at least not in a straightforward way.